In a world where everything felt ordinary, there was one extraordinary thing Cora couldn't escape. The way trees seemed to know things they shouldn't. It wasn't just their stillness, or their age-old presence in the world, that made them seem otherworldly. It was the way they listened. How their branches swayed, not just with the wind, but with the unspoken things humans never said aloud, things left unsaid. Desires, regrets, whispered confessions, but no one ever thought trees could understand. That's how it had always been. We spoke to them in silence, unaware that they had been hearing us all along. Cora was different. She didn't just look at trees for their beauty. She didn't just marvel at the way their leaves fluttered, or how their trunks held stories of centuries gone by. She felt something more. Every time she stepped into the woods, she felt as though something inside her was being heard, something more than just the rustle of leaves. She had never told anyone about the strange feelings she had when walking among the trees. They didn't seem to fit into the world she lived in, where logic ruled everything, and magic was something left for childhood fantasies. It wasn't until one late afternoon that everything changed. She sat down beneath her favorite tree, an ancient oak that towered above her. Its bark was thick and covered with carvings, some old, some newer. People had scratched their initials, left messages, or claimed their love for the tree. But today, something was different, something in the air. The world felt unnervingly quiet, like the space between her breaths was too long, too heavy. And then, she heard it. I never told her. I should have said it. Now it's too late. The voice echoed through her mind, as if it were coming from deep within the oak itself. It wasn't the wind, or the rustling of the branches. It wasn't an echo from some other hidden source. It was the tree. The tree had spoken. Cora stood up quickly, her heart racing. The world around her seemed to freeze. She glanced at the tree in disbelief. Had she imagined it? She reached out and touched the rough bark, hoping for some sign that she hadn't lost her mind. But all she felt was the same heat in the air, like the tree was alive, in a way that was beyond anything she had ever known. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder. They weren't just one voice anymore, they were multiple, layered, a chorus of secrets spoken through the rustling leaves. Each one had a different tone, a different emotion, desire, regret, betrayal, love. They were coming from the tree, or perhaps from every tree in the forest, each recording something hidden, something people had kept in their hearts for far too long. Cora stumbled backward, her mind spinning. What was happening? Could the trees really be recording human secrets? And if so, what were they going to do with them? Cora stumbled away from the oak, her head spinning. The whispers continued, weaving through the air, indistinct yet strangely familiar. The words weren't just echoes of the past, they felt urgent, as though they were speaking directly to her. The idea that the trees might be recording human secrets had seemed ludicrous. But now, she wasn't so sure. She had to know more. She had to understand what was happening. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her deeper into the forest, toward the other trees. The whispers were getting louder, each voice carrying a new layer of emotion, as though the very forest was alive with human history stories long buried and forgotten. As Cora walked, the world around her seemed to blur. She was no longer simply in a forest. It felt as though she was walking through the minds of countless people, each tree a witness to a moment in time, each leaf trembling with a secret longing to be heard. She paused in front of a tall pine, its trunk marked by the scars of age. Its branches swayed in the wind, but there was something different about this one. Something waiting. She approached, drawn to it. For a moment, she hesitated, uncertain whether the strange sensation in her chest was fear or something else, something far more powerful. Then, as if compelled by an invisible force, she placed her hand on the bark, and instantly, the voice came. I should never have left. If I could go back, I would. but I can't, and now she's gone forever." The voice was thick with regret, tinged with sorrow. Cora's breath caught in her throat. This time, the words didn't come in whispers. They were clear, raw, and heavy with emotion. The voice, whoever it was, had been broken by a decision they would never be able to undo. Cora felt the weight of the secret press on her chest. It wasn't just the voice of a stranger, someone from a distant past. It was as if she could feel the very regret of the person living within the words. Her fingers trembled against the tree's bark, as if the tree itself was absorbing the pain and grief, keeping it locked inside. For a long moment, Cora stood there, trying to process what she had just experienced. Her mind raced. She had felt the power of the tree before, but this was something else. The trees were not simply passive observers. They were storing these secrets, holding them as if they were sacred. And what's more, they were sharing them with her. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by another voice. This time it was different. There was anger in it. "They said they would protect me, but they lied. Now it's too late." Cora jerked her hand away from the pine, heart pounding. The voices were growing louder, more insistent. It felt as if the entire forest was speaking to her now, each tree holding a piece of some unspeakable truth. She could feel them pressing in on her, filling her mind with fragments of lives she had never known, choices she had never made. Her pulse quickened, her breath shallow. She wanted to pull away from it, to run far from the forest and the terrifying reality that seemed to be unfolding before her. But she couldn't. She was tethered to this place now, bound by the knowledge that these trees, these ancient beings, had the power to reveal humanity's deepest, darkest secrets. She stood frozen, her body shaking as the voices continued to swirl around her, their weight threatening to crush her. But as she stood there, another realization washed over her. These secrets weren't just random, they were connected. Each one, each voice, seemed to build on the next, forming a tapestry of human lives intertwined, linked by unspoken truths, and somehow, she was part of it now. In the distance, she saw a flicker of movement. Someone was approaching. She wasn't alone. The figure moving toward her in the distance was unmistakable. Cora's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar silhouette. Julian. He had been a friend once, before everything had changed. They had grown up together, spent hours wandering the woods, speaking in the quiet language of nature, exchanging their hopes and fears as only the young could. But over the years, they had drifted apart, and yet, here he was, walking toward her as if drawn by some unseen force, just like she had been. The moment their eyes met, a strange chill ran down her spine. "Did you hear them too?" Julian's voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he were afraid to speak too loudly, as if afraid the trees might hear him. Cora didn't respond immediately, her mind still reeling from the voices that had filled her head. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The look in his eyes said it all he knew. She stopped herself, unsure how to explain what had happened. "I don't know how this is possible," she said, her voice trembling. "But, the trees, they're recording our secrets, our regrets, our memories. I don't even know how to describe it, Julian. It's like they've been listening all this time, holding on to everything." Julian stepped closer, his eyes narrowing in thought. "I've been hearing them for weeks," he said, his voice distant, like he was speaking more to himself than to her. "I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was just, imagining things. But the longer I've been here, the more I realize that this forest, these trees, they know everything." Cora swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. She could feel the weight of the forest pressing in around them, the air thick with secrets too heavy to bear. But why? Why are they doing this? Why are they showing us these secrets? Julian's gaze flickered toward the trees. His face was pale, his expression troubled. "I don't know," he admitted, "but Maybe it's not about showing us the secrets. Maybe it's about us finally seeing them, finally understanding the weight of everything we've kept hidden. The words hit her harder than she expected. She felt the truth of it deep in her chest. The trees weren't just recording secrets, they were offering them up, forcing people to confront what they had buried for so long. Cora's mind wandered to the voice she had heard earlier, the voice of regret, the pain that had seeped from the oak. She thought about her own life, her own hidden truths. Could it be that the trees had heard everything, even her unspoken fears and desires? What happens if we don't face them? Cora asked, her voice small, almost scared. What if we ignore it? What if we leave here and pretend it's not real? Julian didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted toward the oak tree, where the whispers were still swirling, now growing louder, as if the very wind was speaking with the voices of 1,000 broken hearts. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. Maybe the trees will keep recording. Maybe they'll keep waiting for us to listen. Or maybe, he stopped, the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Maybe they'll stop. Maybe they'll stop recording us altogether, and we'll never know what they've been keeping. The silence that followed was deafening. Cora could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The trees' ancient beings had been keeping secrets for centuries, but now they were offering them to her. To Julian, to anyone who was willing to listen. But what did it mean? Was it a gift or a curse? Suddenly, the forest seemed to come alive around her. The whispers grew louder, the voices more distinct. She could hear them clearly now, each one a confession, a regret, a longing. I never told her I loved her. I kept it inside, and now she's gone. I did it. I took the money. I thought I could live with it, but I can't. I lied to him. I told him I was okay, but I was dying inside. Cora staggered back, overwhelmed. The weight of these secrets was suffocating, and she couldn't breathe. She felt as though the trees were suffocating her, as though their branches were wrapping around her heart, pulling her in. I need to leave, Cora said, her voice trembling. I need to get away from here. But Julian didn't move. His eyes were locked on the trees, his expression distant. He was lost in the voices, caught in the same pull that had captured her. Don't you want to know more? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Don't you want to hear it, all the truth behind every secret, every regret? Don't you want to understand what they've been hiding? Cora hesitated. The temptation to listen was strong. The urge to hear it all was almost overpowering. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. These secrets, they weren't hers to carry. The trees had their own stories, their own weight to bear, and Cora couldn't carry them all. No, she said softly, but with conviction. I don't want to know anymore. Not now. I can't. Turning, she made her way back toward the edge of the forest. Her steps were shaky, her mind swirling with the flood of voices still echoing through her head. Julian didn't follow her. He remained in the midst of the trees, lost in their whispers. And as she walked away, she realized that the trees had not just recorded human secrets, they had become the keepers of those secrets, forcing humanity to confront its darkest truths. But what would happen if the world learned what the trees knew? Would the truth set them free or destroy everything they had ever known? Cora's footsteps echoed in the quiet forest as she moved away from the whispers, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the secrets pressing on her back, like an invisible hand pushing her toward the edge of the woods. But the pull of the trees was still there, stronger than ever. With each step, the voices seemed to grow faint, like the forest was calling her to stay, to listen, to understand. But Cora couldn't, not anymore. She had heard enough, seen enough. She had been carrying the burden of other people's regrets for too long. She had no more room for their secrets in her heart. But as she neared the edge of the forest, something stopped her, feeling a deep, unsettling sensation in her chest. She paused, frozen in place. "Don't go." The voice came again, soft, but insistent. This time, it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from inside her, from the place where the whispers had settled deep within her mind. Cora closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. She wanted to turn around, to walk back into the forest and confront the voices. But part of her was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if she listened for too long. If the trees continued to unravel the threads of her own secrets she had buried for years. Her father's betrayal, her mother's silence, the weight of the guilt she had never let go of. Would the trees expose it all, pull it out of her like they had done with everyone else? Her fingers trembled as they brushed her forehead, trying to ward off the crushing thoughts. She was about to leave this behind, but the trees, if they could hear everything, if they could capture all the buried emotions, then didn't that make them the ultimate truth-tellers? The keepers of the things people were too afraid to face. Maybe they want us to confront our secrets, Cora whispered to herself. Maybe it's not just about keeping them hidden. A shadow moved behind her, and she turned, startled. It was Julian. He had followed her, after all. "You're running," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You're running from the truth." Cora's eyes flickered to the path that led back to the city, a few hundred yards away. The weight of the decision loomed over her like a storm cloud. Was she running from the truth? Or was she protecting herself from a world that had already been turned upside down by the trees? "They're not just recording secrets," Julian continued, taking a few steps toward her, his face set in a grim expression. "They're holding us accountable. We've spent too long hiding from the truth, Cora, and now they're forcing us to see it. But if we don't listen, if we don't face it," he shook his head, "it will just keep festering, buried under the surface, and the world will never be free." Cora's heart raced as his words hit home. What if he was right? What if the only way to move forward was to face the things they had been avoiding? The things that the trees had been listening to, quietly recording all these years. But there was another voice inside her, one that was terrified of what might happen if they exposed too much. If all the secrets, all the pain and regret came to light at once, wouldn't it break everything? Would the world even survive the truth? "I'm scared, Julian," she confessed, her voice trembling. "What if it's too much? What if the trees, what if they're not just showing us our secrets? What if they're showing us the truth of everything, everything we've ever done wrong?" His face softened for a moment, and he stepped closer. "I get it," he said quietly. "But maybe it's not about fixing everything at once. It's about understanding it, seeing the truth, no matter how painful, and letting it be." Cora's breath hitched. She glanced over her shoulder toward the path that led out of the forest, toward the life she had left behind, the life that had been full of secrets, half-truths, and unspoken words. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to face it." As if on cue, the wind picked up, and the trees around her seemed to respond. The whispers grew louder, as if the entire forest was waiting for her to decide. The oak tree she had left behind, its deep voice still resonating in her mind, called to her, urging her to return. It was no longer just about the secrets of others. It was about hers, too. The forest knew, and it was pulling her back into the fold, whether she was ready or not. But what if exposing those secrets could destroy everything? "Do we even have a choice?" Cora asked, her voice barely audible. Julian's eyes met hers, filled with a quiet resolve. "Maybe not, but if we don't face the truth, how can we ever move forward?" "The trees are waiting, Cora. The trees are keeping the secrets, but they're also waiting for us to learn from them." A wave of fear washed over her, but beneath it, something else stirred, a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the key. Maybe the trees weren't just showing the darkest parts of humanity. Maybe they were offering a chance for redemption. Cora turned and looked back at the oak, its branches heavy with the weight of the past, The forest was calling her, offering her the opportunity to confront the hidden parts of herself. But was she ready to hear them? The night had fallen when Cora made her decision. The forest seemed darker now, the whispers more urgent. The trees, with their ancient knotted trunks, loomed around her like silent witnesses, and she knew they were waiting for her to make the final choice. But the air was heavy, charged with a sense of inevitability. The truth was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. Cora stood there, staring at the towering oak, the one that had first spoken to her. She had come to accept that the trees weren't just recording secrets, they were holding them, and soon they would share them, whether she wanted them to or not. But the moment she stepped closer to the oak, a voice from the shadows made her freeze. "Don't do it." The voice was low, filled with menace. Cora spun around, her heart leaping in her chest. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by a hood. It was Mark, her old acquaintance, a man whose presence she had tried to avoid for years. He had always been a part of the corporate world, working with powerful people who controlled everything: information, money, even nature. He had connections everywhere, and he always had a way of getting what he wanted. "I warned you before, Cora," Mark said, his voice cold and commanding. "You can't play with forces you don't understand. The treesy secrets, they aren't meant to be exposed." Cora's pulse quickened as he stepped forward, his eyes glinting with an unsettling determination. "You don't know what you're doing," he continued, his voice low. "The truth is dangerous, Cora. People like us, we're not supposed to have access to this kind of power. The trees weren't meant to speak. They weren't meant to reveal what's buried beneath the surface. You don't get to decide that," Cora snapped, her voice shaking but defiant. "These trees are keeping secrets. They're holding the past hostage. It's time for them to tell the truth." Mark's smile was a tight, bitter thing. "You don't understand. People in power, corporations, governments, they have been using the trees for centuries. They've been tapping into the trees' power to control information, to manipulate people, to keep society in line. What you're about to do isn't about truth. It's about chaos." His words struck a chord deep within her. For a moment, doubt gnawed at Cora's resolve. What if he was right? What if revealing everything would destroy everything? What if the chaos he warned about was inevitable? "You can't take this away from us," Mark said, his tone hardening. "The trees will expose the truth, and the world will crumble, and I won't let that happen." Cora stepped back, her heart racing. Mark's presence felt like a storm, an overwhelming force that threatened to drown her in its wake. She knew he wasn't here by accident. He had come to stop her. "You think you're protecting people?" Cora said, her voice trembling. "But you're just holding them hostage. You're using their pain, their secrets, to control them, to keep them afraid." Mark's smile faded, replaced by a cold, unfeeling expression. "I'm protecting order. You're talking about exposing chaos. The people are not ready for the truth. They never will be." Before Cora could respond, Mark took a step toward her. "You don't have to do this. Walk away, and this will all be forgotten. Leave the trees alone, and the world will stay as it is." But Cora couldn't walk away. "Not now. I can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't live in a world where we're all buried beneath lies. The trees, maybe, they hold the key to everything. And maybe it's time for us to face it." Mark's expression twisted with anger. "Then you've made your choice." In one swift motion, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a device. Small, but powerful. Cora's eyes widened in realization. He was going to destroy the trees. "Don't," Cora shouted, stepping forward, but Mark was already pressing a button on the device. The ground beneath her feet began to shake as a low hum filled the air. "No," Cora screamed, but it was too late. The device emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound, and Cora felt the trees around her shudder. Their one strong voices silenced in an instant. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Mark stood there, breathing heavily, his face taut with satisfaction. "It's over," he said quietly. "The trees can't speak anymore. The secrets are buried once more." Cora felt her heart sink, her breath catching in her throat. The trees, everything they had recorded, everything they had held, was gone. The truth that she had fought for, the truth she had hoped would heal the world, had been erased. For a long moment, she stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Her gaze flickered back to the oak, its one-sprout branches now, motionless, silent. "You can't silence the truth forever," Cora said, her voice shaky but fierce. Mark's lips curled into a grim smile. "We'll see about that." And as the darkness closed in around her, Cora knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The trees might be silenced now, but the truth would find its way out. It always did. The silence that followed Mark's actions was deafening. The hum from the device still lingered in the air, a stark reminder of what had just happened. Cora felt her body go cold as the world around her seemed to shift. The once vibrant forest now eerily still, devoid of the whispers that had guided her this far. The trees, those ancient, towering beings, were no longer speaking. Their voices had been shut out, their secrets locked away. Mark had won, at least for now. Cora stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the oak, the one that had first spoken to her, the one that had begun it all. The tree now looked like any other, silent, motionless. The weight of its memory, of everything it had held, seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog, suffocating her. It was as if the trees themselves had been wounded, their ability to connect with the world and with humans now silenced. Mark stepped forward, his footsteps deliberate, and Cora instinctively took a step back, her mind racing. She could feel the pull of the forest, of the memories and secrets that had been shared, but they were gone now. The pain of losing them, a pain she hadn't fully understood until now, settled deep in her chest. "You don't understand, Cora," Mark said, his voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "I know you wanted to expose the truth, but people aren't ready for it. They'll destroy themselves trying to cope with everything that's buried inside them. The trees were meant to keep it hidden. They were never meant to reveal it." Her chest tightened at his words. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him. The truth, as raw and painful as it was, might tear the world apart. It might break everything. But then she thought about the pain of living with secrets her own, and everyone else's. The forest hadn't been just about exposing guilt. It had been about connection, about finally understanding the weight they all carried. The trees had been holding these secrets, yes, but they had also been a reflection of humanity's deepest struggles. And now, with them silenced, the world felt emptier, darker. "Is that really your solution?" Cora asked, her voice steady, though her heart still pounded in her chest. "To bury the truth, to keep people in the dark, because it's easier, because it's safer." Mark's expression hardened, but there was something else there, to regret, maybe, or fear. "People don't want the truth," he said quietly. "They want comfort. They want to live without the weight of everything they've done hanging over them. The truth doesn't give that to them. Maybe they need to face it," Cora said, stepping forward, her voice growing stronger. "Maybe we all need to. Maybe that's the only way to move forward." She paused, her gaze locked on the once powerful oak. For a brief moment, she felt the deep connection to the tree, to the land, to everything that had been shared. She had learned so much from the trees there. Truths were not just burdens, they were opportunities. Opportunities to heal, to grow, to change. She couldn't allow that to be taken away. With a final glance at Mark, Cora reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, battered notebook, a gift from her mother, one she hadn't opened in years. She flipped it open, her hands shaking slightly, and quickly began scribbling something. In the margins, something she had long buried but had finally come to understand. It was the one truth she had kept hidden from herself, and now it was time to face it. She took a deep breath and turned to Mark, her decision clear in her mind. "You can try to silence the trees," she said, her voice steady, "but the truth will always find a way to break free. Even if it's just in the smallest whispers, it will get out. And when it does, it won't be your choice anymore. People will hear it, and they will choose what to do with it." Mark's expression shifted, anger flashing in his eyes. He moved toward her, but Cora held her ground. There was nothing left to hide, not anymore. "You don't get to control the truth, Mark. You never did." And with that, she turned back toward the oak, her heart pounding with resolve. She placed both hands on the tree's trunk, her fingers brushing the rough bark. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, something shifted. The forest seemed to stir around her. Slowly, softly at first, the whispers began again. The trees had begun to speak once more. Not in the loud, chaotic way they had before, but in the quiet, patient voice of the earth, a voice that would never truly be silenced. Cora opened her eyes and took a step back, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over her. The secrets of the world were not gone. They had not been erased. They were now part of the forest, part of the cycle of life, waiting to be discovered by those who were ready to listen, who were ready to hear the truth. Mark stared at her, his face contorted with frustration and disbelief. But he knew, in that moment, that he had lost. The truth was no longer something he could control. The forest, and the truth it held, would never be silenced again. The wind swept through the forest, as if in response to Cora's decision. It rustled the leaves, tugged at the branches, and, for the first time in what felt like ages, the trees began to sing again. Their whispers were no longer frantic or full of pain. They were soft, almost gentle, as though they were speaking to Cora in gratitude, acknowledging the release she had brought them. Cora stood at the base of the oak, her fingers still pressed against the bark. She could feel the vibrations of the tree's ancient pulse beneath her skin, a rhythm that felt alive, that reminded her of the earth's unwavering endurance. The trees had not been silenced forever, they were still here, and the truth would always find its way back into the world. Behind her, Mark's footsteps were heavy, his presence still filled with tension, but there was a quiet resignation in the way he moved. He had tried to control the truth, to bury it, to hide it from the world. But in doing so, he had only prolonged its inevitable return. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. Cora turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. "It's over, Mark." For a moment, their eyes locked as cold, calculating, hers steady and resolute. Mark had spent so much time trying to hold the world together with lies, with silences, with control. But Cora had chosen a different path. She had chosen honesty, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful. "I can't change what's already happened," Mark said quietly, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "You've exposed too much. It's out of my hands now." Cora nodded, understanding the weight of his words. It was truth. The truth had already started to ripple through the world, even if it hadn't fully reached everyone yet. The trees had whispered it, and once the world had been exposed to even the smallest fraction of that truth, it would change everything. "Maybe you're right," she said. "But the truth is something we all have to face. The sooner we do it, the sooner we can move forward." Mark looked away, clearly unsettled by the raw certainty in her words. He had always been a man of control, of manipulation, but Cora had shown him that sometimes the truth didn't need to be controlled, needed to be embraced. Without another word, Mark turned and walked away, retreating into the shadows of the forest, his figure swallowed up by the trees. Cora watched him go, but she didn't feel anger or regret. She felt relief. The burden of the past was no longer on her shoulders. She had done what needed to be done, even if it hadn't been easy. She had given the truth a voice. The forest, still buzzing with its quiet hum, felt alive once more. As she stood there, taking in the familiar sense of pine and damp earth, she felt the weight of the world lighten, if only for a moment. The secrets of the past were no longer buried. They had been shared, and that sharing had freed them, and everyone they had touched. She turned back to the oak, her hand resting on the trunk once more. The tree seemed to pulse with a renewed energy, its roots deep in the earth, holding stories that were both heavy and healing. The air around her felt fresh, full of potential. Cora took a deep breath. The journey was far from over. The truth would continue to ripple outward, just as the trees would continue to stand silent, steady, and patient. But now, when the world came to them, when people came to them seeking what had been lost, the trees would no longer be silent. They would speak, and the world, for better or worse, would listen. Months had passed since the truth had been exposed. The world, in its own way, had started to heal. Slowly, reluctantly. But the trees, the ancient keepers of secrets, continued to stand tall, their branches reaching toward the sky as they had for centuries. Only now, the whispers they carried were not full of shame or regret. They were filled with hope, understanding, and an unspoken promise. The past would no longer hold sway over the future. Cora had left the forest that day, walking away from Mark and the heavy silence that had once surrounded her. The decision she made to face the truth, to let the trees speak, had not been easy. It had come with consequences. People were still reeling from the revelations, struggling to understand what the trees had shared. But the weight of those secrets no longer crushed her. She had learned that the truth, while painful, was a necessary force for growth. She stood now, years later, at the edge of the same forest where it all began. The oak tree, which had first revealed its secret to her, stood proudly in the clearing. It had not changed. It had not faltered. The very air around it seemed alive, vibrant, a reflection of the world it had helped change. Cora was different now, too. She had spent years learning, growing, understanding the importance of confronting the hidden parts of herself. The truth had set her free, but it had also forced her to rebuild everything she thought she knew about the world. The trees had taught her that secrets held power, but only when kept in the dark. When shared, even the heaviest burdens could be lightened. The world was still imperfect. People still struggled. But they had learned, through the trees' revelations, to begin facing their own truths. Some embraced the honesty, while others fought it, clinging to the comfort of lies. But Cora knew, with unwavering certainty, that it was the beginning of something greater, something more honest, something that would endure. As she touched the bark of the oak, the whispers stirred again, not in the frantic chaos they had once held, but in a soft, steady rhythm. The voices had become a part of the forest, a part of its history, and now, they were no longer just the voices of the past. They were the voices of the future, calling for change, calling for understanding. Cora smiled to herself. The forest, and the truth it held, would continue to speak, and so would she. The world might not be perfect, but it was hers to shape now, just as it was for everyone who had been touched by the trees. The truth would always find a way to break free, and as long as she lived, Cora would be there to listen.